important story here. Michael Moore asked him to help tell the story of being a Muslim in America, claiming they were being persecuted because they couldn't build a mosque in Tennessee. But once he dug into the details, the entire story changed. Joining us now, documentary filmmaker Eric Allen Bell. Thank you for joining us, sir. I followed this extensively, this Murfreesboro, Tennessee mosque. It's a big mosque. Tell us how it went down. Originally, they got approval to build it. They started to build it. Then what happened?
Well, the approval was to build a 53,000 square foot mega mosque in a town of 100,000 people with 200 to 300 Muslims, only 45 of which are paying members. So we're talking about a multi-million-dollar project. There was backlash in the community against it, and I thought this would make a great documentary. I also went into it with a bias that this is really just about civil rights and religious freedom, and had pursued that, had shot 300 hours of footage taking that point of view. And then,
let me get this straight. There was the Michael Moore group, a couple of liberal-leaning groups that funded your project. Is that right?
No, I keep hearing that Michael Moore funded my project. Michael Moore did not fund the project. He was very supportive. I wrote for MichaelMoore.com. The funders of the project, I signed a non-disclosure agreement, and I can't disclose, but it was not Michael Moore.
Okay, so now you're into this filming. You're leaning towards the original thought that the Muslim groups or the builders of the mosque were being persecuted. But what happened? What changed your mind?
You know, I think there's a perceptive disability that a lot of liberals have, which is when I say Islam, you hear Muslim. So I kept thinking that the opposition to Islam was an opposition to the Muslims. And seeing the Muslim community as victims, my inclination was to stick up for them. So it wasn't until I started to do some serious research about Islam that I realized what was actually happening here, and that I had gotten this whole thing completely wrong.
And what is actually happening? I only have a couple of seconds. Tell me what you found.
I found that there's a man who raped a 9-year-old girl, who owned slaves, who killed his critics, who beheaded a tribe full of Jews named Muhammad, who's the highest moral example in Islam for 1.6 billion people, and that this is a radical, savage religion. The people aren't all radical, thank God, but the religion is the worst, most deadliest idea in the history of the world, and we need to make sure that we keep a close eye on it in this country.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Very interesting topic. Love to have you back and maybe expand on it a little bit more. The treatment of the left after you got this stuff done. Thank you very much for joining us.
Sure thing.
All right. He was ready for a fight for a controversial mosque in Tennessee, but what he discovered about radical Islam changed his mind completely. The documentary filmmaker with us this morning, he has stunning information. Eric Allen Bell, he's my guest again. Sir, we had you yesterday because we wanted to continue that discussion we had. Tell us again. So you're making a film about the mosque in Tennessee that at one point was going forward, then it was halted, and you were against the halting. You wanted to see that mosque built, but when you got there, you started filming. What did you find?
Well, I wrongly thought that the opposition to the mosque was about evangelicals wanting to maintain the home court advantage and just not wanting another religion to have such a big facility in their town. And I had shot 300 hours of footage with that point of view, that this is really about religious freedom. After I had time to spend in the editing room and see what I got, I started to read a book by Robert Spencer called The Truth About Muhammad. And I thought, there's just no way this can be true, because if this was true, everybody would know it. There's no way Islam is this radical. So I did my own fact-checking, and sure enough, there is no such thing as radical Islam. It doesn't exist. Islam is radical. Muslims, fortunately, in America, mostly not radical, but Islam is radical to the core. So I realized I'd made a mistake, and tried to correct that by writing a blog for Daily Kos. I'd written 109 articles for Daily Kos. It's a liberal blog. They get about 1 million visitors a day. And I wrote something just explaining to people some things they probably don't know about Islam, specifically its stance on women, gay rights, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, death for apostasy, death for being homosexual. And I was told I was right-wing and an Islamophobe for pointing these things out.
All right, so we'll get to that liberal response. But first I want to talk to you about the mosque. Now, you pointed out that it's a substantial mosque. Did the community of Murfreesboro, Tennessee, need a mosque that size?
Well, you know, you got 100,000 people in the community of Murfreesboro, Tennessee. An estimated 200 to 300 people are Muslim, all of whom attend the mosque, and 45 paying members of the mosque, building a 53,000 square foot facility. Do they need something that big? I would say, in my opinion, they're anticipating an influx of refugees. They have long-term plans. Do they presently need it for the size of their current membership? Clearly, no.
Do you know where the money came from? Did you find out in your investigation and filming?
You know, that's the million-dollar question. We don't know. I have found a link between Abdul Kati, the vice president of the treasurer and vice president of the Islamic Center, between the North American Islamic Trust, which is a Muslim Brotherhood front group. But as far as following the money, smoking gun in that regard.
And now, lastly, the liberal media, since you've changed your opinion on that mosque, they're treating you how?
Well, they don't return my calls. I mean, you know, they loved me when I was saying that this was a civil rights issue. You know, the only media that's paying attention to this issue when I present facts, scary facts, are the conservative media. That's where I get invited to go on the radio and on television. The liberal media, which I didn't believe existed before this, I thought that was invented by Rush Limbaugh. There is a liberal media, and they do have a bias. They're not interested in this story. You know, I spent an hour doing a pre-interview with National Public Radio, and I presented a lot of alarming evidence to them, and they didn't do anything with it.
Why is that? Why did they turn their eye, as you point out, to the facts?
Who knows, really? I think it's hard to admit when you're wrong. Who knows where they're getting their funding? And I think, like we had talked about yesterday, there's a perceptive disability that a lot of liberals have. When I say Islam, they hear Muslim. So if I say I'm against Islam, what they heard is I'm against Muslims, which sounds like hate speech. And the last thing NPR wants to do is engage in what they perceive to be hate speech.
All right, I'm going to leave it there. Eric Allen Bell, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, he was ready for a fight for a controversial mosque in Tennessee, but what he discovered about radical Islam changed his mind completely. Joining us now, former documentary filmmaker Eric Allen Bell. Good to have you back, sir. So we've gone through the Tennessee mosque. We've gone through the liberal treatment of you since your switch to against the mosque. Talk to me a little bit about the Muslim Brotherhood. How prevalent is the Muslim Brotherhood in that mosque and throughout America?
Well, the estimates say that about 80% of the mosques in America have been radicalized in some way, receiving some kind of financing through Islamic theocracies which are hostile to America. The literature, which is usually published by Muslim Brotherhood front groups, teaches sedition, treason, Jew hatred. Let's not forget that the mandate of Islam, not radical Islam, is to force the world to submit to Islam. So that's what's taught in mosques. How aligned is the Muslim Brotherhood with the Islamic Center of Murfreesboro? Time will tell. That there's an alignment is clear. On my website, globalinfidel.tv, I've provided the documents that I have that caused me a great deal of concern about Abdul Kati in particular as a Muslim Brotherhood operative. I'm just wondering, why hasn't the Department of Homeland Security done anything? And there are others there. Mossad Rawash, a member of the board of the Islamic Center of Murfreesboro, is uploading photos of known Islamic terrorists to his MySpace page, sharing them with his Islamic friends throughout the world, and nothing has been done, and the media couldn't be less interested.
Mr. Bell, there are some that would say that there's a Sharia creeping into American society, and may or may not be through the mosques. Do you see that?
Yeah, when I first heard that word creeping Sharia, it sounded like some kind of Red Scare paranoia thing to me. Until I started to actually do the research, I started to look at what Frank Gaffney and this Center for Security Policy had put out, a 10-part video and also a written report. And it shows the signs of, you know, soft jihad or stealth jihad. Let's not forget that the Holy Land Foundation, which is the largest bust on the part of the FBI of an Islamic Islamic charity that was funneling monies into Islamic terrorist organizations, that a memo was unearthed called, that memo, what it called for was to engage in a civilization jihad, which would destroy the West from the inside using its own evil hands. And many of these Muslim Brotherhood Front organizations, especially the Council on American Islamic Relations, which was an unindicted co-conspirator in the Holy Land Foundation trial, are clearly using our media, our legal system, our academic system, and so forth to try to destroy America from the inside.
And sir, lastly, at one point during your career, you were at least friends with, or at least had consultations with the likes of Michael Moore and some of the other liberals on the left. How has that relationship changed?
A lot of them broke up with me through text message. I have a few liberal friends that have their minds have changed, because when I discuss this issue, I stay on point with human rights. But for the most part, you know, I've received a lot of hostile emails, a lot of name calling, a lot of people assuming that, you know, I'm a hate monger. So I've lost my livelihood, I've lost my reputation, I lost my car, I lost my credit because of the movie. This has been a bumpy road. All of that said, on an instinctual level, I know that the direction I'm going is the right direction, and quite frankly, I just know too much now to turn back.
All right, so we're going to have to leave it there. Eric Allen Bell, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.